Alright, back with another video, and today I wanted to go over a topic that I don't see discussed all that much, which is accommodating resistance for powerlifting training. So some of you might have tried this, others of you might not even know what it is. So let me just briefly explain. So simply, accommodating resistance refers to using bands, chains, and other kind of overload tools to change the resistance of a lift. So this kind of training method was first popularized by Westside Barbell, and now you might see it every now and then on Instagram or in your local gym. It's not all too common, but I do think there are a few uses for it, and I think it's worth discussing. So just to kind of explain what accommodating resistance actually is, it basically refers to using some kind of device or method to change the resistance at certain points of the range of motion. So for example, adding on a resistance band, a chain, or something like that. Now you're probably wondering, like, why would I even use accommodating resistance? Why can't I just use straight weight on the bar? And to be clear, I don't think accommodating resistance is anything special or unique, but I do think there can be a few benefits in certain contexts that you might want to consider. So the reason accommodating resistance kind of even came about has to do with our muscle physiology. So not to bore you too much, but our muscles produce different levels of force depending on their length through their range of motion. So usually a muscle can produce more force when it's closer to its resting length, basically not when it's fully shortened or fully lengthened. So to give you a good example of that, most people know that when you squat, the hardest position of the squat is near the bottom. So you squat down, you come up a couple of inches, and then you'll hit a sticking point. So in that position, the quads are very lengthened, so they can't efficiently produce a ton of force. Then when you overcome that sticking point, the quads are getting a little bit shorter, they're getting closer to their resting length, you can produce more force and finish the lift. Same thing for the bench press. So when you get to the bottom, your pecs are really stretched out and lengthened. Then as you start to press, a few inches off your chest, the pecs are back to their kind of resting length, and then they can overcome the rest of the lift. So hopefully that makes sense. So the reason you might want to use bands or chains is because they kind of match up a little better with the force your muscles are able to produce. So in the squat, let's stay with that example. If we're just using plates on the bar, straight weight, like I said, the lift is hardest at the bottom. If you add on a resistance band or maybe even chains, the lift goes from being most difficult at the bottom to most difficult at the top. Obviously the reason being, as the resistance band stretches out, there's more force it's applying to the bar. Same with chains, as you stand up, more chain links come off the floor and the weight gets heavier. So might give you a few benefits. I think they're very small benefits, but I think it's worth going over them and kind of considering them in your training. So before we do get into the benefits, if you look at the actual scientific research on accommodating resistance, there doesn't seem to be any significant difference between using accommodating resistance or straight weight when we look at strength gains. So basically that means there's probably not a lot of difference between using just plates on the bar or accommodating resistance. Having said that, there still could be times when you could get a benefit from using bands or chains. So the first one is just that you're able to use heavier kind of absolute weights at higher velocities when you use bands or chains, because obviously they kind of cater to your natural strength curve. You'll be able to use heavier weights than you would be able to without the bands. Now I don't know if there's any real benefit to that, but I don't think it's ever a bad thing to be moving heavier weights at faster speeds. Another benefit potentially for some lifters, it could help with anxiety at heavy weights. So instead of seeing like 4, 5, 6 plates on the bar, you might have less plate weight, and obviously that weight is made up from bands and chains. So it could just allow you to go into the lift a little bit more confident, kind of not overthinking it so much, and lead to better quality training. A good example of that is using a slingshot on the bench press. So some of you might have seen it. It's like a stretchy kind of band that goes over your chest, allows you to lift a little bit more weight. And obviously using a slingshot on a bench press is probably going to make you feel a whole lot more confident with the weight in your hands. So you're holding a heavy weight, the slingshot kind of takes some of the resistance at the bottom for you in the more vulnerable position, if you want to call it that. So yeah, just could be good for confidence, just a few psychological benefits. But then I think the biggest benefit for me personally is that it encourages the lifter to continue producing force throughout the whole lift. So instead of kind of slowing down near the top, it encourages you to really carry on pushing hard. For me, I really noticed this personally on the bench press, because I'm quite fast off my chest, and then when I get to about the mid-range, I kind of slow down and stop pressing as hard, and then I'll fail lifts at lockout. So that might be something to consider for those of you who kind of slow down a little bit. There can be some kind of drawbacks to using accommodating resistance though, so obviously you have to set up the equipment. Some of it can be quite expensive, like chains, slingshots, that kind of thing. That's why in most of these videos you'll see me using resistance bands. So my preference is to use mini bands. So you can pick up a pair on Amazon for kind of like £6 or £7, which comes out to about $15. So yeah, that's my kind of go-to. But yeah, just kind of in conclusion, I like using accommodating resistance on the squat, bench and deadlift kind of far out from competition when I'm in a little bit less specific development block. Preference is to use mini bands, and I think when I program them in, I kind of stick to lower rep ranges, higher intensities, use it as kind of overload work. I usually only use it for about one development block and then I'll switch it out. And I would very rarely use two forms of accommodating resistance in one block. So for example, I wouldn't use squat with bands on day 1 and squat with chains on day 2, for example. But yeah, I definitely think it can be a useful tool when used in the right context. I wouldn't rely on it heavily, and I don't think it has any crazy benefits, but might be good to test it out for 1 or 2 blocks and see how you respond personally. So consider giving it a go in your next training block and give me some feedback on how it went. If you like this video, leave a like and comment any suggestions for future videos. I think the next couple I'm gonna kind of just discuss topics over training footage like this, so you can carry on with your day-to-day stuff, just chuck your phone in your pocket and kind of listen along and see if you learn anything. If you do want to stay up to date with my content, follow me on Instagram, so that'll be Ben_evidence-based strength, and I'll speak to you all next time.